Claire Cousins and welcome back to the videos. Lovely to see you and I hope you're all well. This video is all about the sewing machine. A lot of people know the sewing machine, so you probably won't need to watch this. However, I can give you some little tips and tricks, so it might be worth watching, it might not be. But especially if you're new to sewing and you want to understand your machine more, then I will give you some information that may help, especially when it comes to things like tension. Now, let me explain. This is my sewing machine. This is what I call my everyday machine. I used to sell sewing machines. They use a brand called Silver, based in High and Ferrers. I love their machines. I've got Genome's, I've had Frista Rossman's, but I now have 3 of these Silvers. One is an overlocker. There's this lovely basic machine, and I have an embroidery sewing machine as well. Most machines today are very similar. They're top loading. Some of the very, very cheap range, they are actually what's called a front loading machine. So if you do have a front loading machine, that will have to be a separate video because I actually don't have a front loading machine anymore. Let me talk to you about this machine here because some of it is still relevant. Now this machine, it has a top thread feeder here. Some machines actually keep them in the box, so you might need to hunt for it and it pops in there. Some companies, they have like a little lever and you can pull it up, so look out for that. So you can feed your thread from there. You may well have what's called a felt disc, a little red one. Pop it on there. That helps for the movement and the run of the machine. I personally prefer to use the thread that's at the back here, and it's horizontal feed. This is good because it feeds the thread off more evenly. This is good to have both of them if you're running a twin needle. When you've put your thread on, let me just explain. So the thread goes on the back there, and you must have a little stopper on the end. The thread you'll need to put onto a bobbin. Here's the bobbin. This particular bobbin is the Pacific brand to the machine, and I would recommend you always purchase the bobbins that are branded to the machine, or at least get these bobbins from Silver because these fit in most top loading machines. And the reason for that is if you were to buy off the shelf, I shouldn't really say it, but hemline is one of the worst. Their bobbins are thinner invariably. However, your machine might take a thinner hemline, so please check this depth here and check there isn't a slight raise when you purchase it, because if there's a slight raise, that will cause you issues if your machine isn't used to that type of bobbin. The other sorts of bobbins that are out there are the good old-fashioned metal ones. Now, I'm a bit naughty. I do end up putting these in my machine every now and again purely because I've got them. However, I am aware that that if I have problems, it will be because of my bobbin. Okay, so here's the bobbin. There's usually a hole in the bobbins, and what they recommend is that when you use your threading system, some have you should have like a little tension disc here. It's like a little spring-loaded tension disc. You should go around that. Some machines tell you to cross it. This particular brand doesn't, but it's worth looking. You're supposed to feed, and I will show you if I can, feed that thread up through the hole before you start. But you know, you can see already I'm struggling with this. Alright, so if you are like me struggling with that, what I've found, especially working in a school and where kids need the bobbins quickly, you go from the back of the bobbin and you go round and you wrap it round as much as you can, and then hold it and push it against the tension thing here. I'm not sure that you can see that. I'll try and zoom in for you. I'm actually my own cameraman, so I apologise if you can't see it. The bobbin has now been pushed against this here. That's another thing. Sometimes people get their sewing machine out of their box, they haven't used it for a while, and then they realise the machine isn't running, and that's because what's happened, let me just put that there for a second, what's happened is whilst the machine has been in the cupboard, this has got knocked and the drive isn't working, so because it disengages the needle. I mentioned a minute ago that if this was not knocked across, the machine won't work, and I'll just zoom out and prove to you now that the machine won't work. Right, I've got a stop-start button, so here you go. You'll notice, oh no, the needle's not sewing, so something's wrong, and it will be because your bobbin winder is engaged here at the top. Okay, So stop the machine. So that's a handy tip. I did have a machine come in where the lady wasn't aware she'd knocked it, and she thought it needed servicing, and it's worth recognising that that could be a problem. So I'm going to put that back across, pop that on, hope you can still see, pop it back against the winding unit, which is now disengaged my needles. Some machines you have to do something to your balance wheel, so again check your instruction manual. Sometimes there's a little click, a little button you have to press, and that will disengage the needle. Sometimes you actually have to physically turn it apart. I do recall Bernina, the very old Berninas, you used to have to take the little section in the middle out and wind it back. Okay, so there's my bobbin. I'm going to wind it up now. Now when it comes to the bobbin winding, you need to make sure this is lovely and even. Some bobbin winders, if it's not set properly at this end, if this here isn't set correctly, what can happen is it will wind either to the top too much or to the bottom too much. And believe it or not, these can be adjusted. Again, check your manual. If not, when you do take it in to be serviced, get them to check it. So we've wound the bobbin. That's enough for what I want today. The technicians have always said to me, Claire, never wind more than one colour thread on your bobbin. That irritates them. They never told me why. I think it's something to do with the fact that the machines stop midway. I am terrible for that. Okay. My cutter's here, and I tend to just use the cutter on the machine. Some people's cutters are at the back. If not, get a pair of scissors, and you're just going to take it off. Okay, let me explain the rest of the machine to you. So there's a guide at the back here. There's a guide that will line you up with this section here. Now this section is crucial. What I will say to you is you must ensure that your foot is up. Your foot is up at this point for a reason. Inside here are two metal plates, they're called tension discs, and they are the ones that squeeze the thread to prevent it running too fast. If it runs too fast, it will drop down lower into the fabric and cause jamming in your machine, in your fabric. It can cause that horrible bird's nest that appears underneath the fabric. Now, when the foot is up, those tension discs actually open. If you try and thread it with your foot down, because some people say, oh, I've followed the instructions, but you probably threaded it with a foot down. If you threaded it with a foot down, those are already closed and the thread can't get into it, and therefore you think you threaded it correctly, but unfortunately you still get the bird nesting. So lift your foot up, put your thread through the disc. Oh, I started it by accident. You follow any indications that are on your machine, or follow your instruction manual, because then from the tension disc you should be going up to this thing here. Now this thing here is called a take-up lever, and it's this that measures the amount of thread that the machine requires. If it's not in here, then what will happen is it will just take as much thread as it likes, and again you'll get your bird nesting underneath the fabric. So with the two things combined, it's being squeezed and it's being measured. That should be correct. You can adjust this, and you're allowed to adjust it. You have what's called a tension wheel or a tension disc. Mine's just a hand manual adjustment here. Some people have a computerised one, and again, check your manual. Also check your tension, what I call a tension gap of recommendation. If I show you mine, you'll notice it's got a mark on it. I'm going to zoom in a little bit for you. Hang on. Hopefully you can see that. You'll notice it's got like this line on it. And if I go the other way, let me go the other way, 6, 7, the higher the number, the tighter that squeezing. So that's squeezing really tight right now. If I go back into what I call the normal range, that's usually indicated by this sort of line or a red mark, or the numbers might be a different colour. And then back to 0 is where it's really opened up and very loose. And some machines, companies say use the 0 for free motion embroidery, for instance, because the less tension you have on your thread, the better for that. But this is something you'll need to learn and adjust and get used to with your machine. Okay, I'm going to put it back to its normal range, which on my sewing machine is 4, and I know it's 4 because 0 to 8, well, the middle number is 4, so that's where it should be. So I've explained the tension disc, I've explained that it's squeezing, I've explained that it is measuring. It then needs to go down to usually 2 more guides. You have one guide normally just below the take-up lever, and then you normally would have a guide actually near the needle. So, and that's the one that I find quite tricky, and the best way to get that one in there, I have found, is you use your left hand and create what I call a 90-degree angle. Again, I'm not sure you can see that. I'm going to do that again. I'm going to show that again because I think that's quite difficult for people to see. So there's the guide here, and then you hold it 90 degrees and you just hook it 90 degrees into the hook up just above the needle. Now let me just zoom in a little bit more. If you're unlucky, you don't have what's called a needle threader, so it actually is at this point easier to lower your needle, and you can hopefully poke it through the hole. If you're struggling and you're doing all this business, you can see that I'm mucking about now, I would get a sharp pair of scissors and cut off the hair. People have a habit of licking the thread, but what can happen with licking the thread can actually swell and it will make it harder to thread. Okay, so you can see that I've cut it nice and it's gone through. And I need glasses, my eyesight's appalling. So that is the tip I can give you, cut it with a sharp pair of scissors. If you're lucky enough to have one of these, my arm's in the way, it's called a needle threader. Okay, and the way this works, there is a tiny little tiny hook that goes through the eye of the needle, and normally you just hook the thread from one side to the other so it lines up, and it lines up with a little tiny hook in the needle, and it's a tiny little hook in the needle that will flick it and pull it up, and you can see there's your loop. You grab that loop and it's threaded. Marvellous. You can then lift your foot up to get your fabric underneath, etc. Now for the bobbin. Now I hope you can see my bobbin. This is the bobbin area here. It's top loading. We have what's called a little release button. That releases the cover. If you're lucky, you've got a clear lid. I find if you haven't already bought yourself a sewing machine, I would recommend getting one with a clear lid, and the reason for that is you can see if the bobbin's about to run out. Now the way this works, and I'm going to show you that with a bobbin race that has been removed. Here we go. This is what's inside here, and this is the bobbin race. You drop your bobbin in here, and again, like the top where we had a tension disc, there is what's called a tension plate, or there's a little screw. Let me show you on this one. Hang on. Ooh, there we go. This little screw here is yellow for a reason. This screw, if you lose it, is a nightmare to find. You can adjust this screw if you feel the thickness of your thread requires it. I personally have a separate race for the very reason that I actually don't like adjusting this because it's very hard to get it back in the right place. So if you're a free motion embroiderer and you like to run thick threads in the bottom of your machine, I would recommend getting a separate race, because that's easier to take this out and swap it in than it is to keep releasing the screw, because if the screw pings out, it really is a problem. So in there's a little plate, and what needs to happen, I'll demonstrate it outside of the machine, what needs to happen is when that goes in there, it must slide. I don't know if you can see that. It must slide between the two plates, and therefore it must have some resistance. Let me just pull it and you can see I'm tugging it and there's some resistance. If you forget or don't put it through that tension plate, it will just run, or just in this case drop out and catch. Okay, so please be aware that it must go inside there. Now my machine's brilliant in so much as that, it's just because I forget what I'm doing, it's got a little diagram here. It's also got another diagram on the plate, so it's very handy. Again, check your manual, but this particular manual machine tells you to go anti-clockwise, and you drop the thread in, and it must be anti-clockwise because when you go through and follow the arrows, you can hear it click into that little tension plate I was showing you earlier, and we'll click it in like that. So it's now in the machine. Some machines at this point tell you not to bother bringing the thread up. Some machines you do need to bring the thread up. This machine you don't need to bring the thread up. I will go through the process and explain it with you. Let me just zoom out a little bit. Oh, that's zooming back in again. I'm going to zoom out and I'm going to just talk you through some more bits of the machine. Just spin the machine around. This little guy on the end here, it's called a balance wheel. A balance wheel. Now, I always say to people, please never, ever, ever turn that wheel away from you, okay, because that is what will cause jamming. You must always turn the wheel towards you. The old sewing machines, the old Singers, and oh, I've even got my little toy machine here to show you, they used to be wound that way to work, but these modern machines are not. So please make sure you wind it towards you. So what am I doing? I'm going to bring the thread up from the bobbin, even though I don't actually need to do it for my machine, but most machines you do. So to do that, oh, hang on. So in order to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to hold the needle thread. We're going to turn this balance wheel here, and as the needle goes down, it will engage with the bobbin. It will also activate the dog teeth. The dog teeth for the guys underneath, I'll explain those as well in a minute. And we'll just bring it up like that. And in this case, the thread has pulled up. You'll see it there. I don't know if you can see that. I mean, might need to zoom in again. Okay. Right, so hopefully you can see that this bobbin is now running. You can see it running, hopefully. You can see it turning. With this particular machine, and I think with quite a few others actually, you do need to make sure the thread in the bobbin actually is crossing it. Then you know it's actually threaded correctly. You're now ready to sew. When you're sewing, what you need to remember is the way the machine works. I'm just going to take this foot off. Oh, just in case you're not aware, these are removable feet. And again, most machines have these removable feet. Let me just show you how. There's a little lever here, and they just whoop, drop off like that. I like to keep my clear foot on most of the time, and that seems to work with most stitches, unless I'm doing free motion embroidery. And then to get it back on, all you do is you lower it down, and if it doesn't click in, let me just do it so it doesn't click in, and then you'll see what I'm doing. It's not clicking in very well, so what I would then do is pull that little bit at the back, and it will help it find its rote back in. And what that is, it's got like a little, it pulls a little lever inside. Now I'm taking that back off for a second because I want you to see these things here. These are called dog teeth. Now I'm going to unthread my needle because I don't want it to be sewing, but I want to explain what's happening. What's happening is these dog teeth, they come up and they go back. They come up and they go back. They come up and they go back. And they're basically clawing the material into the machine. So if the machine's not feeding properly, it could be you've got dust and grime caught in this area, and it's worth cleaning it out. And I'll explain that in how to clean your sewing machine. If you've not got an even feed machine, you've got a problem, then it is worth getting what's called a quilting foot or a walking foot. I will show you one of those in a future video. Let me put my foot back on. Let me rethread my needle. You'll get to see me rethread my needle again. I don't know if you can see though. Your machine is now ready to sew. Now, when you come to do your sewing, if it's regular sewing, like dressmaking, etc., and bag making, you'd make sure you've got your right sides together. So that's, if it's printed, this is printed, This is the right side of the fabric, and you'd have right sides together like this. And it's always a good idea to pre-test your fabric if you're not sure. So I've got a little scrap here and I'm going to pre-test it. You place it. Now, depending on your seam allowance, you've got little marks or gauges in this plate. And it might be that it's 1.5 centimetres. And what you can do if you're not sure is actually get a ruler or a tape measure and actually measure your distance from your needle, where your needle is coming down, to where the mark is on the plate. My actual plate is marked up in 3/8 of an inch, 5/8 of an inch, 7/8 of an inch. So if you're working in inches, that's okay. But if you're used to 1.5, you might need to mark it. Mine actually does have a little spot to indicate 1.5. And I would keep the edge of the fabric on the edge of that 1.5. What I tend to prefer, because that's what I was used to in industry, is I always use the edge of the foot as my guide. So I'm going to put the foot down on the edge of the foot, on the edge of the material. What you can also do on a lot of machines is you can change your needle position accordingly. But again, not all machines can, but many do. So I'm going to adjust mine so my needle is going to move a little bit further out to give me a bigger seam allowance. So I've moved it. Now on some machines, I call it a dot knot. It's a button, which is a little circle. This button here will do a dot knot. So you can press that button and you'll notice that the needle will just dot knot in the same place. Some people prefer to do back stitch and then forward stitch. I would do back stitch 3 stitches backwards and then carry on sewing forwards. If you do too much back stitching and forward stitching, it can pucker and can look unsightly. Once you've done that, you can then sew straight forward. Now I have a habit of not pinning and tacking unless it's a curve. You can pin and tack if you feel confident that you would rather not. It's your choice, but as I say, it's only a sample. Now that was on full speed. I wouldn't recommend full speed straight away. Adjust your speed or adjust how you're using your foot pedal. Obviously the heavier you push, the faster it will go. When you get to the end of your sewing, what you can do is, remember I turned the balance wheel, you can turn the balance wheel towards you and to get to the very end, because that's a better way of doing it than relying on the pedal. So don't rely on the pedal. Turn that balance wheel on the end like I showed you earlier how to start the machine. And then you can do your dot knot or you can do your back stitch. So in this case I'm going to do back stitch to show you that you can do back stitch. And then we can cut it off. So then you lift up the lever, there's a lever, so lift your lever, pull it out, and it should come out easily. If it's not coming out easily, you need to turn your balance wheel a fraction, because what has happened, if some machines don't complete fully, it depends on the brand. If you turn your balance wheel, it will complete the stitch, it will raise this needle to the highest point, and that then releases all the tension discs. Then you can pull it out and then use your cutter to cut it off. And you should, if you open it up, let's have a look, see? We have a nice seam. Now I've done it in contrasting thread so you can see it, but if you do it in the matching thread, you won't see it. Job done. And I hope that has been helpful in explaining on how a machine works. If you have any questions, do put them in the comment box and I can try and answer them in a future video. I hope you've enjoyed this. Take care, and I hope to see you soon. Bye.